Hello and welcome to another episode of Spark Talk. Today we're talking about Your Party in Britain. It is now official. The Your Party conference happened. It is officially called Your Party. It is officially socialist. It stands for the working class. It stands for trans liberation and so on and so forth. So all good. But there are many, many, many questions that remain unclear or unanswered. And we were at this founding conference of Your Party. And today we want to discuss what's next for your party. We want to do this by first taking a step way back and away from the debates in the left and inside your party and look at the bigger picture in the country. So to do this with me today is Comrade Vincent. Hello.
Hello.
So, right, let's get into it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what's going on in Britain.
What's going on in Britain? I mean, since our last episode, I feel many things have happened, but it's more of the same. So he's in government and everybody hates Starmer. He has the lowest opinion poll ever again, always breaking new record of low opinions. They just had a budget in the Labour government, which was sort of a mixed bag. I expected it to go worse than it actually went through. But basically what happened is the government was able to increase a bit some taxes through the sides and give a bit to companies, give a little bit to the base of the Labour Party by removing the two-child benefit cap, and they sort of were able to continue on this sort of path of balancing act which doesn't satisfy anyone and which doesn't solve none of the problems of the country, but which is not enough of a misstep to really provoke like a strong reaction from the financial markets or a strong uprising from the population, really. And this government is really, I don't know, it's a bit Walking Dead. So it continues by inertia because there's no one really, there to take its place. And that's the state on the political plane. On the economic plane, the economy is totally stagnating. There hasn't been much growth in the last year and a half. It's like margin of error growth, honestly, that we see. Yeah,
the latest figures, I think, is 0.1% growth.
Yeah,
lower
October,
than expected.
Honestly, at this point, for me, it's like margin of error. I don't really believe it,
Yeah.
And the biggest party, obviously, is still Reform UK, which was also the case when we last spoke a few months ago. It has now overtaken Labour as the biggest party in Britain. That is like in terms of membership figures. In Britain, contrary to the US, parties have like proper membership. You're a card holder of this party. That's a lot of the funding comes from this. And yeah, Reform UK is now the biggest party in Britain.
So definitely not a good development overall.
Yes, definitely not a good development overall. Of course, the liberal press is sort of in a campaign right now against Farage over, citing cases how he was a racist when he was in school, which honestly isn't really a surprise, but they're really on the offensive against him. And I think we're going to see increasing numbers of dirty tricks used against Farage to try to disqualify him, just like the liberals are doing in France or in Germany. Right. It's basically their only plan is to try to ban or undermine the most popular party because they don't have any perspective themselves to win back voters, right?
Yeah. I think another part of the context is how the Greens are doing.
Yes.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, so the Green Party elected Zach Polanski, I think it was 3 months ago maybe. And it was kind of an important shift for the Green because Zach Polanski is
a former hypnotist.
A former hypnotist, a former liberal Democrat, a former anti-Corbyn when there was the whole anti-Semitic witch hunt. He's really like a liberal, he's a vegan, he doesn't take planes, whatever. So really like a woke liberal. Since he won the leadership of the Green Party with a bit of a shift in terms of, classic liberalism in the sense that he called this eco-populism. And essentially he talks a lot about taxing the rich, talks a lot, a bit more radical rhetoric sprinkled on the traditional liberal politics of the Green Party. And he's been quite successful, essentially. Obviously, he became leader when there was a huge vacuum on the left of Starmer. Your party did not exist or was just announced. And while your party was there was all this factional struggle and infighting, which we'll get to in a minute. He sort of appeared to be the leader of a party which had its things all figured out. He was campaigning, and basically their membership doubled in the span of 2 months. They're like, depending on the polls you look at, sometimes they're third or even ahead of Labour sometimes. That's quite a feat for like what was a small tiny party. And they've got a lot of people who were interested in your party initially, or young people, leftists, who are turning to the Green as like being, well, this is basically our only option against Farage, because most people don't look to Labour. So that's kind of one of the big change in the last 2 months. I would say the Green Party is sort of overshadowing your party.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it was like you could see it in real time. Like the more the factional stuff inside your party, got worse, the more people were like, forget this, let's go to the Greens.
Yes.
It was so, your party crisis definitely was a boon to the Greens.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit. So as I mentioned at the outset, a number of us were at this founding conference. And I think, I don't know, speaking for myself, I didn't really know what this was going to be like what to expect exactly. I was kind of expecting various degrees of confusion and, I don't know, shit show. But it was interesting, I think, overall what happened. Just for listeners, Comrades Mansa and Evelyn, they did daily videos, and you can check them out on their YouTube channel at Workers Hammer. I'll link that in the show notes. So if you guys want more in-depth, accounts of what was happening and how things evolved, there's a whole series of videos. I think for the purposes of our discussion today, I guess I would just like to give our listeners a bit of the punchlines of what exactly was the scene and what are some of the main, I guess, results of this.
Yeah. It was an interesting event. So, I'm not going to go into all the details, but there was about 2,000 people, more or less, members of your party there. Delegates were chosen randomly among members through sortition. Yeah. I'm not going to get into it anyway.
It's like the Hogwarts sorting hat, really. It's like random. It's absolutely random.
Yes. But it's random. However, the whole purpose of this was to make sure that the far left would not dominate the conference. They were worried that with a classic delegation structure, socialist group would be overrepresented. However, what happened was that because very few people other than committed leftists are ready and willing to go to Liverpool, spend hundreds of pounds in hotels and stuff to get there, basically the conference was a bunch of leftists, honestly. What's interesting in your party is that basically the entire British far left is in it. And so on the one hand, you have a lot of like leftist, communist, socialists like ourselves. But on the other, you have another base of this party, which is really another of its core base, which is really the older Labourite milieu, which has been around Corbyn for years and years. People who don't want to go with the Green Party for various reasons, very middle class, very liberal, but who are themselves more attached to like a nostalgia about the Labour Party. They are still also quite liberal, but nevertheless, they have some sort of emotional attachment to Corbyn and Labourism. And it's sort of these two groups, obviously I'm generalizing, these two groups sort of meeting into this room. And that made up a bit the base of that conference. To understand also, we've alluded it, what's important to understand is that this party is really dominated by a clique around Corbyn. They're the ones who did the sortition thing, to prevent the left. Corbyn is really this figurehead, and he's surrounded by more or less these sycophants and bureaucrats who are organizing this party and really want to create a sort of left-wing, moderate, peace and love party. Their only sort of political coherence is really hating the far left and wanting a moderate option. And that's sort of the dominant grouping at the top of your party, which was organizing the conference. Yeah. I
think they're like real operators. I think they're more interested in like how to how to, make this thing acceptable and electorally efficient. I think those are their like criteria, which is not a bad thing. We want to win elections and so on. But I think it's more that what happens is that leads them to have horrible politics or, actually, I guess, oppose the more radical politics that other wings in your party are pushing. So I guess that's the problem. I wanted to just say there was, a degree of resentment too at this whole conference by members because apparently earlier it was supposed to be much, much bigger. It was supposed to have, far more delegates.
Yeah.
And so on. So yeah, and I think the other thing about it, sorry, I'm now going into random details. The other thing about it is like, when you talk about like the old school labor rights, like a lot of these people, I think, the emotional attachment, all that is true. But, these are people who are themselves witch hunted out of labor, like, the Labor Party branches, over the last several years. These are people who themselves had experienced like what bureaucratism is when the right wing is trying to like purge left wing elements. And I think the other important thing is, maybe not the conference per se, but your party in the course of its development, it had these 4 Muslim MPs. And what that meant also was that, Labour with its pro-genocide platform, it really also drove a huge layer of British Muslims away. So a lot of Muslims in the country were also looking to your party as an alternative. The conference, I think, didn't really reflect that so much in terms of the delegates, but it was also random. But that's also kind of, I don't know if we can call the Muslim population, like the pro-Palestinian sort of population, a base of your party. I think that's, for me anyways, is like a bit up in the air. But anyways, we'll get to that. So, okay. So this party is really dominated by the Corbyn clique. I guess also, for our listeners, Corbyn, what he was 10 years ago, that's not what's happening right now. It's like, Corbyn back then was like, oh my God, like the far left, well, not far left, the left wing guy, Right now, how the situation's changed is like he's really seen as like the right wing thing that's dragging this project to the right.
Yeah. Now that's quite an interesting development. In a sense, it's not that Corbyn changed. Corbyn remained very much the same, sort of speeches for peace and justice and against war, against austerity, very, trying not to offend anyone. And back in 2015, when it was against the Blairites, that was massively popular and there was really a whole movement. Just not so much behind Corbyn himself and what he was saying, but out of he spoke to certain traditional aspirations in the Labour Party against Blair. And there was, massive upswing to the left in the Labour Party, but in society behind him, hundreds of thousands of people. Fast forward to today, you don't have that same upswing anymore behind him. Corbyn is saying the same thing, but he's saying them in a country that is much more polarized, where liberal ideas and sort of left liberalism that he holds doesn't work as well anymore in society. Right now it's really the right wing that is destroying that sort of liberal consensus, and he cannot ride on this anymore. And there isn't a huge upswing behind your party as there was 10 years ago in the Labour Party. I think that's one of the first challenge of this party. There is some enthusiasm. I don't want to say nobody cared, but it isn't the numbers you had 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And as a result, that's one of the main thing. One of the things that was interesting at the conference is that it showed, I think, at the end of the weekend, how although it is the quote-unquote right wing that dominates the party, Corbyn, the base of the party, a substantial part of it at least, is way to the left than Corbyn and his clique. They're not only people like us that are in communist and socialist groups, but also just in general the radical young people that have stick with your party because they've made a conscious choice not to go with the Green Party. They usually are for a much more radical socialist working class type of party and not just a kumbaya peace and love little alliance. Yeah. And I think that's the tension you'll see throughout the conference, but also in the coming months as well still.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just to give you a sense of the right wing of it, like some of the debates were on whether this party should be socialist or not. It's like I did not think that was how low the level of discussion was going to be. I think everybody there showed up thinking like, we're trying to build a socialist party. It's about how to do it. But really, the organizers, who were very much people around Corbyn, they really set the terrain of the discussion. Like, should it focus on the working class? Well, it's like the whole room was like, well, duh. There were, of course, some minority elements who were like skeptical of this, but this is what the right wing really represented, I think, in terms of their attempts to politically water it down and move it more to the right wing.
Yeah.
And I think to give you a sense of how the base is far to the left of Corbyn, and we're going to come to the left wing and what that, who represents that and what that looks like. But, anytime there was like mention of anti-Zionism, the whole room, thousands of people would like cheer and, be very explicitly in favor of that. So it tells you a little bit of where the sentiment of, I think, the membership is at. And the fact that the right wing is trying to clamp down on this.
Yeah, you're right. The right wing tried to impose debate on should the party be socialist? Should we say explicitly working class in the political statement? And they were struggling to get people to speak against those words there. And, even anyways, like there was some funny moments.
They had a hard time. Yeah. It was like 3 people from this side, 3 from that. And they had a hard time getting 3 people who would be like, no, I don't want this party to be socialist.
Yeah, or some people would say I'm against and then get to the mic and speak for it. Anyway, that was quite funny sometimes.
Yeah. So the first day of the conference, it was over Saturday and Sunday.
2 days. Yeah.
Yeah. The first day of the conference, it was really like, well, I guess we haven't even talked about Friday evening. I'm trying not to go into the details, but what happened was that you had Corbyn and Zara Sultana, who, if our listeners don't know, she represents more the left wing. She represents the left wing of the party. They both held separate rallies on the Friday evening. They sent each other really like nice, polite, diplomatic messages to be read out at their different rallies, but they had separate rallies, which already just shows you that they're trying to like cater to their different bases.
Yeah.
Apparently at the Corbyn one, they read poetry and patted themselves on the back, and also threw out leftists from the Revolutionary Communist Group. So that was the vibe at the Corbyn one. At the Sultana one, I think that's where most of the left probably was.
Yeah, that's where I was.
But what happened right at the eve of the conference is that the Corbyn operators expelled a number of comrades from the Socialist Workers' Party because, well, under really like dubious pretexts. But, the conference started with expulsions of leftists. And that really, I think, overshadowed the proceedings.
Yeah. Definitely. If we can take a step back just to introduce Zara Sultana, she represents the left wing of the party. Zara Sultana is an MP, like a member of parliament. She used to be in the Labour Party in the left wing, and she really, came on the scene with Corbyn, really under his wing, more or less. However, after being kicked out of the Labour, anybody that follows a bit your party knows one thing is that Corbyn and Sultana have been fighting from the beginning. They're not on speaking terms. They're barely ever in the same room together. They are really, really angry at each other. And when we talk about the infighting of the party and how it discouraged a lot of people, we're talking really about the fight between Corbyn and Sultana. And at first, this fight was really unprincipled, acrimonious. Zara Sultana launched her own membership portal that Corbyn disavowed. We did an episode called, I think, 6 days that shook the British left, if you want to go back, and we dealt with it. But however, one thing that's quite important to note is that since October, Zara Sultana was excluded from any leading responsibility in your party. And this is where Zara Sultana made a left turn politically, and she started to make these speeches that are honestly quite radical, not only for British left Labourism, but also on a European I don't know any prominent national members of parliament that make these kind of speeches. She makes speeches against capitalism, with the need to overthrow capitalism and fight for socialist transformation of society, nationalizing the entire economy. She makes speeches against NATO, that explicitly Britain must leave NATO, against Zionism. She attacks the Green Party for being too soft on Zionism, saying your party, we should be for the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador, for trans liberation. She brought up the abolition of the monarchy. She's really throwing all those lines, and it reflects the fact that it's not that she became a communist revolutionary per se, although she is moving left, but because she was excluded from leading positions, she feels the need to really lean on the most radical section of the party, socialist groups, radical young people, and really also trying to distinguish your party from the liberal Green Party. She repeatedly attacked the Greens, which, she got a lot of flack for that, but rightly noting, for example, that they support NATO. And honestly, to her credit, she's sort of the only leading figure that has put forward actual political lines for the party.
Yep.
Which isn't just vague peace and love and justice, that are actually key lines, and lines that are also unacceptable to the British ruling class. Just the question of NATO, for example, might sound basic, but getting out of NATO is a line that is completely unacceptable to all quarters of the ruling class in Britain.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, she sounds like a total leftist. She could she's come up through one of these groups. And I think she's actually a very effective speaker as well. If I'd encourage our listeners to go look her up and listen to her speech at the conference. Is quite I'm sorry, this may be capitulatory, but it's quite powerful, I think.
No, I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, no, she's able. Honestly, she sounds like the SWP, or if you know a bit the British left, like she sounds like she has the same politics as some of those socialist or communist groups, honestly.
Yeah. And throughout, I mean, ever since she started coming out forcefully with these politics, what we've been trying to do is say, good, you're saying the right things for the most part. What you need to do is actually make a political struggle to make your politics be the politics of your party. And I think this is where we get to sort of maybe the results of the conference,
Yeah.
So you've got the right wing, which is vague niceties and so on, and expelling the left, and you've got the left wing, which is throwing down the gauntlet on many questions to the ruling class. But I think the conclusion is Corbyn and Sultana are still sort of very much chugging along with their disagreements, which are not resolved. And the party, okay, fine, it's officially for socialism, for trans liberation and the working class, okay, but beyond that, nobody has a clue about what does this party really stand for.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think for anybody I think on the left, but also any people in British society today who are looking for an alternative, they're kind of skeptically watching your party like, okay, interesting, you guys are sort of trying to get your act together, but they don't really have a clue. And I think, some of the people I've spoken to who are, not leftists, they're really very much, I think, skeptical, and they're asking, like, does it seem legit? Does it seem credible? Does it have does it have a future? And I think that's what I would like to dive into for the rest of our discussion about, okay, just to remind us of the big picture again, right? Reform, largest party, leading the polls, government, dead corpse, walking, and the economy sucks. So it's great that Sultana's saying a lot of nice things. Is that going to translate to actual success? Is that going to translate to actual strengthening of the left and the labor movement in this country? Is that enough? Or is it capable of taking on Farage? I guess these are the questions that a lot of people have. And that I think are valid questions, and actually the most important questions, which the left is not really answering right now. So let's get into that.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think it has a future?
It's difficult. I remain hopeful. We sometimes have a bit disagreement of there is a good chance that this thing will still collapse and Corbyn and his clique will just go to the Green Party. But I don't know, maybe, or just drop out of politics. Corbyn is 76. And there are still a lot of pitfalls. I think what your party represent and the reason why we're in it and we're fighting in it, although there's not like a mass support or mass enthusiasm behind it, because it represents a potential. It has a potential possibility which isn't fulfilled at the moment. And what is that possibility is to build a really radical socialist working class party that can speak to the needs of the working class right now, and that which can really peel workers away from Farage and Reform UK. Because that I haven't mentioned this, but reform's main base of support, honestly, is among the working class. Like we see in different countries, the far right is really capturing their anger. And so I think, and this is why we're critically supporting Sultana against Corbyn, because the Corbyn wing, really their politics, if the party would go down their road, it has no future. It's like, liberal wishy-washy politics were not great in 2015, obviously, or they're never a good idea. But in 2025, this will just not work. In times of crises, huge shocks, rise of the right wing, peace and love isn't going to go anywhere, honestly. Sultana at least has the potential to tap into deep anger in society among the youth and among certain segment of the working class. However, one thing there's sort of two problems with Sultana. The first one is that she herself is, while laying out this radical vision for the party, she is not fighting Corbyn. She is doing the classic left Labourite thing of like, she wants to co-lead with Corbyn. She wants to cohabit with the right wing, essentially, despite the fact that the right wing keeps trying to purge her, essentially, and her supporters and doing really dirty tricks against her. She never presents her vision of the party as counterposed to that of Corbyn. And this is a huge problem because it fuels confusion. A lot of people, like, as you said, are just like, can we stop this infighting between Corbyn and Sultana and just start campaigning? It's because they don't really understand that there's really two visions of the party that are battling, and Sultana never makes clear that this is the case as well. That's sort of the first problem of Sultana. And the second one, sorry, I'll just finish on this and then let you go. The second one is really that Sultana, although she is arguing radical politics and crossing lines against the ruling class, she has not broken from liberalism as an idea. So she still defends certain positions that are quite liberal and will act as a repellent of the working class. And she's also, times her politics are quite superficial. She's started to move left, really to lean on the left wing of your party. So her politics comes in the form of like slogans and against the monarchy, against NATO. And so the result is kind of this sort of hybrid between socialism and liberalism in the form of slogans that I think are quite removed from where the working class is at, while also clinging to like liberal positions, which will repel workers. So there's a lot of work to be done in the left wing. So just to respond to your question very briefly, does it have a future? I think it does if it's able to really take the road of a radical socialist party, and if it's able to really elaborate a program that is both anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, but that can also connect with just the living conditions of the working class in today's Britain.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to maybe speak a little bit about what exactly we mean when we say Sultana's not fighting. Like it's very obvious that she's not doing that. But I think oftentimes people, including on the left, they'll mistake that and say, oh, well, you guys are just, you just want splits. Like that's harming the movement and blah, blah, blah. We're not saying like, destroy the party. That's not what we're talking about. We're not saying purge Corbyn. But I think what we're talking about is if you really understand that Corbyn and Sultana have two very different ideas for what this party should look like and what this party should politically stand for, and these two ideas cannot coexist forever, they are not compatible, then one of those ideas needs to come out on top. It needs to politically defeat the other idea.
Exactly.
And I think that the point is that amongst, I think, a layer of the membership of your party, they are very much, I think, sympathetic to Sultana's politics, but they kind of see Corbyn as this like figurehead or, this kind of, but Corbyn's kind of this permanent fixture on the British left, It's like, what would you do without Corbyn? But I think it's not that we want to boot Corbyn out necessarily. It's that Corbyn needs to come over to Sultana's side or stop being an obstacle by whipping up right-wing purges and let your party be the radical force that the membership wants it to be the anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist force that Sultana is trying to talk about, and, not push it to the right. I think that's ultimately it's a political struggle between two different ideas. Yeah. We're not talking about more dysfunction. We're not talking about more chaos. And in fact, actually, you recently wrote the article, What's Next for Your Party? And in it, you make the point that it's actually by not having this political struggle that's going to continue to cause more confusion and chaos.
Yeah.
because these things will come out sooner or later and they'll get expressed as like, oh, are we going to have democracy or these kinds of branches or those kinds of branches, which the left loves to talk about. And there's a time and place to talk about those things. But the point is, so long as there's two different ideas, those tensions are going to emerge in one way or another. The task of Marxists has to be to make them come out in their clearest, simplest way. And, like, here's like the side, here's a politics of one side, here's a politics of the other. And to actually let the membership decide which one should fight for it while making the strongest case that it should be the left wing. Anyways, that was like that's what we mean when we say political struggle, like a fight. Like Sultana needs to do this to win, basically. So otherwise it's going to go nowhere.
Yes. The Sultana can talk about radical things, and she can even criticize the right wing. Like, she called out their purge, saying that was anti-democratic or whatever. But she never present her vision of the party as being in contradiction to the right wing. She never says, here's why my vision is the best for it to work, and here are the problems of Corbyn's and the people around him, and why I think this is not a good way forward for your party. Of course, she never says that because that's sort of a red line, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of classic laborism, you fight to live with the right rather than defeat it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Corbyn did, in 2015, 16, 17. He coexisted with the Blairites. He made all kinds of concessions to the Blairites until to the point that the Blairites were like, okay, bye, And it's really like a repeat of the same. And it's not that we got different personal characteristics, but it's like, it's really the whole problem of like maintaining like unity between the left and the right wings on a maintaining unity between the right and left wings. Which by definition is kind of rotten.
Yeah. So that's sort of the first problem with Sultana. And she's not alone in this. The SWP, it was kind of funny during the conference. I listened to the national secretary of the SWP, which was expelled on a Friday night. Twice I listened to him on the Friday and Saturday nights at fringe events. And on both counts, he was like, very kind of tepid, nice speech. And he's like, oh, Corbyn and Sultana need to just agree and lead the party together. And it's like, dude, like, they just expelled you. Like, the right wing has expelled you. And really, it's not even against the SWP. They really wanted to get at Sarah Sultana. That was because, he's a supporter of her. And it's really this, despite their never-ending plot, these people are looking to cohabit or counterfire, which is another big left group as well. Also always ready to say, Corbyn and Sultana, it must be both of them, etc., etc. So the point, again, it's not to expel Corbyn, but it's like, one or the other vision must dominate, must defeat the other, and that requires explaining to the membership that there are two visions and make the case for the left wing.
And I think just to wrap up on this point, I think it's really unserious and actually a huge problem on part of the left when they're like trying to act as if they're like the more mature and the holier than thou, like, oh, don't worry, you punched us in the face, but please just get together. I think it's like they might think that they come out looking good, but what they're doing is actually they're contributing to keeping things confused.
Yeah. Because they don't want to appear as splitter, as wreckers, which is always what they're accused of. Okay, I understand tactically, we got to be careful. We don't want to appear as wreckers. What's actually wrecking the party is this fake unity, is this false impression that's entertained in the membership that there isn't a counterposition between what Corbyn is saying and Sultana. They could just get along if they put their egos to the side. Well, no, that's not true. They're leaning on different layers and social bases in the party, which is expressed politically through peace and love on one side and a more radical socialist vision with its problem, but radical socialist vision on the other.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's get to the meaty bits, the more interesting bits, for me anyways, which is, I really liked how you summed up Sultana. She's kind of this hybrid between like socialist politics and like liberal politics, which express itself through slogans, and she's got nice slogans. But let's talk about it. It's like if it was a matter of just saying the right slogans, then the left wouldn't be so small. It's like you hold up a nice sounding slogan and you think that the workers are going to flock to you. That's just not how it works. You have to make it relevant to their lives, their livelihoods, and where they're at, where their consciousness is at. And I think that's kind of, one of the big things that your party, or at least Sultana, needs. It's kind of the weaknesses, I think, of Sultana's side, because she's saying nice things, but is it striking a chord?
Yeah.
And
exactly.
how do you actually use her political slogans, her political perspective as a tool to, break down the support for Farage? I don't see that happening right now. So maybe we can get into that. So one main weakness is that she's got slogans, but are they actually or are they capable of winning over the working class, which is moving and looking to Farage?
Yeah. Well, the short answer is no. Because, I mean, just to be clear to our listeners, like in the British left, everybody talks about the working class all the time. Everybody at the conference is like, the working class, the working class. And, in North America, a lot of workers think that they're middle class, and that's false consciousness. In Britain, you sort of have the opposite thing where a bunch of people who are clearly middle class think they're working class because middle class is sort of an insult. And so on the left, a lot of people are actually in denial about actually the central problem of the socialist movement, which is its total separation from the working class. There weren't many manual workers at your party conference, yet it's the party that's supposed to represent the working class.
But you're just fetishizing manual workers, Mansa.
Yeah, that's what I'm being told, and while being explained that somebody that studies anthropology is also a worker, and it's like, come on, like, I'm sorry, no. Anyway, the problem is not having middle class people, but the problem is that you do have to win the working class, and in order to win the working class, you have to understand that we don't have it at the moment. You know what I mean?
For sure.
I think that's just to like set up the problem properly, right?
Yeah.
So will Sultana's slogans win the working class? And I think we have to be very conscious on the left wing. Although we are campaigning for Sultana, we're very clear that we support her against Corbyn. Even if she would win the leadership of the party, your party would not be able to win the workers really because of that. And so maybe we can go through some of it, or you wanted to add something?
No, let's get into it.
So for example, let's take her good position. She's against NATO, she's against Zionism, she's against the monarchy. These are all correct positions. Obviously, we agree with that. However, the reaction of many workers, kind of understandably, would be like, well, why does that matter? Like, Zionism, why should I, like, what's the connection between my livelihood, my jobs, the living standards that are falling, and NATO and Zionism? And so far, the arguments she's making are quite, well, there isn't that much argument, because she's making sort of slogans for your party base, which obviously it likes those points. But, you really have to take on these questions from where the working class is at, I think, at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I think it's the same thing with NATO, for example. I think a lot of workers would be like, and we're not conceding to this, but they'd be like, oh, but it's a defense alliance. What are you talking about? It's good if Britain is protected. Like that's where people are at. People don't have automatically radical ideas. They don't automatically understand like imperialism and why this is against their interests. Especially like in the context now where like Europe is starting to up its military spending. You're going to have, and there already is some in like some small towns in the north and in Scotland, for example, a little bit of a revitalization of like some military industry. So people are going to be like, wait, what are you talking about? But those are jobs, which we have very few of. So why should I be opposed to NATO? So you have to make these things make sense. You have to link that to why it's actually, undermining the struggle for a better livelihood and a better Britain and so on.
Or Zionism as well is the same, and I think there's a lot of denial in the Palestine movement about this, but a lot of working people don't, they don't support what Israel is doing, but they really don't see, well, why should I, like, why does that concern me, Like, just sometimes you'll hear people, more working class people, saying, why in left meeting everybody always talks about Palestine but never talks about Britain, And of course, there's a bit of a reactionary element in this, but at the same time, this is a real concern that, like, just having moral lectures about the need to care about Palestine doesn't solve the material situation for workers here.
Yeah, obviously. Absolutely. Like the two are not actually separated, but in the heads of normal people, there's no obvious link. So the job of a party who wants to be socialist, who wants to win over workers, has to be to actually make that connection.
Yeah. Yeah. And the answer is kind of simple. It's the American empire. Your party should oppose the American empire. NATO is an institution of the American empire, just like the European Union. Support to Israel is a key pillar of this. And right now what's happening is that the American empire is really squeezing its allies, Britain included, and to shore up its position. And that'll mean massive austerity, cuts, public services, being cut to fund growing military spending because that's what the US wants. Workers have no interest in this. There's a simple argument that can be made, really tying all the foreign policy to the living conditions of the working class. Massive, we're seeing right now in Britain, it's been a few budgets that the only department that really, really increased substantially is the defense spendings.
Yeah, for sure. So there's, I guess, like a category of Sultana slogans, which are principled, which are correct, but they kind of stay suspended, in midair. And they don't actually intersect like people's consciousness.
Yeah.
I think that would be one set of problems with that.
Yeah.
I think the other is her sort of liberal slogans.
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about, I think that for me, there's two that jump out. One is on the whole question of immigration. And the other one is on dealing with sort of social questions, which is, again, is a huge explosive issue. So,
yeah. Well, you've touched earlier about this divide. I think that's really, really important. So a few months back, Zara Sultana made a comment regarding the trans liberation question, where she said that, she's pro-trans, obviously, and she said there's no place in your party for socially conservative views. Now, Zara Sultana is, being a Muslim woman herself, she does have a following among this pro-Palestine Muslim population, and a lot of Muslims were quite angry at this because conservative Muslims who might be, anti-imperialist, pro-Palestine, are often not pro-trans necessarily, to say the least, or will not necessarily be all in favor of gender ideology, etc. And then there's been an increasing rift between the left, which is really pro-trans, for trans liberation, obviously, and the Muslim population. And this is really a really bad division because we're talking about the two most oppressed group in this country, trans people and Muslims, and they're really at the bottom of the bottom of society, really. And the problem with Sultana is this comment about socially conservative views is, rather than trying to bridge that divide, it really increased it, sort of pour gasoline on this fire already. By really drawing a rigid distinction on what sort of progressive ideas you have in your head, rather than really trying to make a class argument or appealing to class interests as to why a Muslim in the working class must defend trans people, while at the same time maybe going against a lot of the liberal politics that dominate the trans media. Anyway, that's sort of a complex question to unpack. My point being that you cannot solve it with identity politics, which Zara Sultana still very much clings on.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem. I think, we wrote a little leaflet following this fallout on the trans question, saying Sultana's disastrous comment. And from my understanding, it was not well received in the left, but it was better received, in other sectors. So for me, I think, let's be really clear, like, we are for trans liberation. Any sort of socialist party should be for trans liberation. I think the question is how to go about it. How do you fight? Not just for trans liberation, but let's be clear, like, what's the context? We're talking about the context of the country. What's the context for the trans movement? Now, I'm sorry, but that's not just in Britain. That's like across the board in the West. The trans movement is one of it's the first sector to get attacked by the growing right wing. The trans movement is up against the wall and it is weak. And I think the question is how to best defend the existing rights of trans people, how to put them in a better position while also building unity such that they can, such that the movement can be strengthened and can go forward, on better footing. And I think if you want, if that is your aim, then by basically saying any socially conservative person is not welcome in an organization is to basically saw your legs off. Now, look, there's a difference between, say, a figurehead of a party who openly has transphobic views, that would be a huge problem. And,
Yeah.
glad that guy he
Adnan
resigned.
Hussein, yeah.
Yeah, Adnan Hussein, he's pretty right wing, actually. So we're very
Yes.
happy that he resigned. There's a difference between an MP openly spouting, transphobic views, that we would be absolutely against that. But again, as you said, Muslims are also one of the other groups of people in this country that, given the overall social context and, post 9/11 West and, against in the context of the genocide and everything, that they've been super gone after. So what the need objectively is for both of these groups to just defend their democratic rights, defend each other, on the basis that the same Labour government is harming their interests, has been attacking them. And you know what? I'm sorry, but a reform government is bad news for both communities. So let's agree that we have a common enemy and that we will stand in defense of one another.
It is important to not tolerate transphobic, just openly bigotry. I think what's important is to pose the question properly. You mentioned rightly so that trans people need alliances. Trans people are a tiny percentage of the population. They need a broader alliance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the problem of the trans movement that's been really built through with identity politics and sometimes quite liberal and idealist ideas is that it really focuses on ideas in people's head. Do you agree with gender theory, gender ideology, et cetera, rather than presenting the trans liberation question as a struggle which intersects common class interests of other group as well. And so, and the problem with this socially conservative thing, it's not that we agree with social conservatism.
No.
Of course we don't. But the problem is that by drawing hard, rigid line on do you hold progressive views on this particular issue or not, you're really abandoning any sort of terrain to have an argument over your class interests and thus any possibility to win over those, Muslims or social conservative people who are class allies in the struggle against the British state, but who maybe find themselves pitted against each other because of identity politics. So rather than really undermining this divide, just drawing rigid line on progressive ideas, what's in your head actually increases. So it's posing the question properly for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a really nice example, which may be a bit different, it's the miners' strike. Gays and Lesbians for the Miners.
Yeah.
Pride. That is an excellent movie that shows how there were conservative divisions, but they were broken down in the course of struggle against who?
Yes.
But the Iron Lady in the course of struggle when she was trying to attack both groups. So it's
Exactly.
really, I like that you put it that way, you have to see it as part of a struggle and not, do we all agree and hold hands and then therefore we can advance together? I don't know.
Yeah. If you take Sultana's statement, no place for socially conservative people like those miners in 84, they wouldn't have their place in your party. Well, kind of a problem because they were working class. Yeah. So you see how placing the things in terms of progressive ideas or not is a very liberal framework, which actually cuts you from the working class. And that's why these are the kind of ideas which have pushed the working class away from the left, actually.
Yeah. And just to give a little bit of a texture to this sort of fallout this has had, is obviously, when this fiasco was playing out, the polarizations really hardened, I think, between the left wing of the party that's for trans liberation and I think more of the Muslim membership in your party who, I guess they came to your party through this whole, they've got the 4 independent MPs and we're all going to build a new situation through just electing Muslim MPs, right? That was kind of their whole framework. But in the course of this, what's happened is you've had a lot of those people just quit. And I think the other thing is being pro-Palestine, great. But just on that basis, it's not really a program to fight the government. The independent MPs, they really won votes from Labour because of Palestine. But there is a limit to how far you can take that and run with it. What I'm trying to say is that all these independent MPs, now they're just trying to do more independent election campaigns on the basis of appealing to the Muslim voters. Okay, so what you've had as a result of this fiasco is the emergence and the kind of growth of the I don't know, I think it's called the Independent Campaign Alliance or something, which is just like all they're interested in doing is fielding candidates, winning votes, and they have no real perspective of how to actually change anything, but they just want, political power. So that's also a bad development, that what that does is it just splits, it isolates the Muslim population more, and it weakens your party also.
Well, I think in terms of when we mention the right wing in Corbyn, I think there are a lot of conservative Muslims that are leaning more to Corbyn because they view Zahra Sultana, yes, sort of as a liberal. And I think in general that alliance you mentioned shows a bit of a trend that's important to intersect and combat for the left wing. There's a lot of Muslim people, they're really under attack in Britain, and it's been the case for years and years and years. And they see the right wing, growing and coming to power. And there is a sentiment, I think, in the Muslim community of like, yes, we will fight Islamophobia. Yes, we will fight attacks against us, but we will also show how good British we are, how good, we're not traitors to the nation. And certainly I think this sort of, opposition to trans liberation, I think is seen by many as like, now that this isn't in the ruling circle, it isn't in the mainstream, let's not touch this. And that's why I think they're catering really to conservative sentiment, because that's actually what's growing at the moment. And you see it on the right wing of your party, this expression. And I think that's why for the left wing, it's so important to break with these liberal conceptions, which are just contributing to isolating the left. And really, because the only way you can make a case to Muslim people as to why the way forward for you isn't by being a good British person. That's not how you will integrate Britain, really, because Muslim people will never be welcome, actually, under capitalist Britain, but it's really through struggles and links with the labor movement and struggle against the British ruling class, really. That's the way forward for integration, really.
Yeah, no, you're right. I guess the way to sum that up is like the strategy for the Independent Alliance is the politics of respectability.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's reflected in the independent MPs like the Shaukat Adams and Ayub Khan as well. They're, I don't want to generalize, they have their differences, but I think that you see this a little bit, respectable sort of small businessmen and good conscience, pro-Palestine certainly, but also quite conservative on some question, not just social, even also economic.
Yeah. Okay. But I guess the overall point in linking this back to the problems with Sultana's sloganeering is that the method in which she tried to defend trans people actually ended up hardening polarization.
Yeah,
I think.
Exactly.
And, this is still very much an unresolved question.
Yeah.
And it's bound to blow up sooner or later.
Yes.
In the party. So that's, I think, one weak spot. And what it really poses is like you need to figure out how to bridge these divides, not contribute to building them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I think the second thing, the big thing that's dominating discussion in British politics for some time now is immigration.
Yes. Always immigration.
And, yeah, of course. So, and this is again like one of those things where the left wholesale has very liberal politics. It's like if you criticize anything about immigration, you're reactionary, you're conceding to the right wing, etc. So I think it's a very touchy subject. But if you don't take it by the horns, you're not going to be able to deal with it.
To be concrete, it's just that Zahra Sultana, she correctly denounces the scapegoating of immigrants and, attacks reform and the right and the fascist, and all this is correct. But what does she have to say on immigration is just the slogan of stand up to racism, which is refugees are welcome here. And that's sort of the slogan she puts forward. And it's like, look, the country is all super polarized on this question. Because Britain is stagnating, a lot of working people see their living standard falling, and they're, looking at immigrants and saying, sometimes in a racist way, but sometimes in just a frustrated way of like, why, this country is getting hundreds of thousands of people every year, or refugees are getting housed in hotels while I have nothing. And, why is that? And why am I being called a racist to say that maybe something is wrong here? And there's a lot of frustration. And this is on what the right wing really thrives. And So just saying refugees are welcome here not only doesn't address none of this, not only contributes nothing to, untangle these polarization and try to win the working class on our side, but it actually is seen increasingly, this slogan, by many working people as like an attack on them. The problem with this slogan is that it's really like a moralist and liberal slogan. Refugees are welcome here. And it's a slogan that's directed at more at like working people who are sometimes frustrated that their one hotel in their community is being seized by the government to house migrants at taxpayers' money, rather than being directed at the government, which is responsible for this entire mess. And so she's really just, I think, echoing a very liberal and moralist program on immigration, which will not at all undermine the right wing on this issue, but which it will actually help it.
Yeah. I mean, you're being very succinct. Because, you and I can sit here and talk about this and be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay, cool. But the truth is, because of how charged this question is, I think every single syllable we've just said, people will be like, no, conceding to the right wing, conceding to the right wing, conceding to the right wing. So I want to maybe just take a few minutes to break down what that is, because one of the attacks that the left will often throw at us is, oh, you guys are just saying this because you're trying to like get an ear into the reactionary, into the reactionaries.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just disingenuous, but I think it flows from a broader understanding of immigration, actually,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think that's one thing. And I think it also flows from like understanding that, like, when the left says refugees are welcome here, where exactly are they being welcomed? Let's be concrete. Where are they being welcomed? They're welcomed in places like Epping, in places that are like super like deprived, in places that, where there's a high level of unemployment. And the left can say these good slogans, but the left has no answers for how to integrate refugees, for how to actually make sure that refugees have a life when they get here. And for how refugees, when I talk about their integration, like how can refugees and British workers, native-born workers, how can they actually get along? The left doesn't see these as its problems. They're just concerned with, okay, they're welcome here. And then they're like, okay, bye.
You have to be a good person.
Yeah, you have to be a good person. Ultimately, that's how the left sees the refugee question. And I think that's hardly enough,
Yeah.
But anyways, can we maybe just talk a little bit about like how to approach immigration as a Marxist?
Yes. I mean, just the first thing you have to understand is that the British ruling class for, I don't know, the last 20, 25 years has favored increased number of immigrants to maximize its profit. And this wing of the ruling class, which loves cheap labor from in the European Union, but also other countries, uses liberal, quote unquote, anti-racist, multicultural ideologies and talking points to push this policy. And there is a truth that Britain being, totally broken and stagnant, the ruling class has kept bringing increasing number of immigrants to prop up the economy artificially. You bring more people, the more people buy things, and the GDP grows a little bit. So, and I think the problem on the left is that saying those things for leftists is like, absolutely inadmissible. And the only thing that leftists see are this other wing of the ruling class, which is against immigration, Nigel Farage and everything. They only see this one. But if you want to have a hearing with working class people that are turning to the right, you have to actually attack both wings of the ruling class. Those who are against immigration and those who are for it for cheap labor, for their own capitalist reason. This is kind of basic Marxism, but it's been totally forgotten because the left has so much merged with liberalism and liberal ideas on this question that just saying what I said, some people could accuse me of being a racist on the left. It happened before. But it totally discredits the left and prevents it from having any sort of hearing in working class community. I'm sorry. So that's the first sort of quote unquote theoretical point. Like there is a liberal wing of the ruling class which brings immigration for its own profit, and there's nothing progressive about it. Britain is broken. There's no economic growth. They've ravaged the country and deindustrialized it. Bringing ever increasing number isn't. We're not for closing the border, obviously, but it isn't also like just a progressive thing. And if the left answer is just to, oh, let's celebrate immigration and that's just great, well, you're sort of blinding yourself to like a massive problem in society, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. It basically allows them to prop up a really, really, I think, hollowed out economic structure, especially if you look at the public services.
Yeah.
You know, you look at the NHS, you look at education, you look at, I don't know, what else? Probably hospitality. Like all of these sectors would fall apart if not for the high levels of immigration.
Yeah.
So what that allowed the British state to do is like just not invest in the NHS and, you know, use cheap labor, migrant labor to prop it up. Because of course it's going to be the immigrants who are going to be more willing to endure horrible working conditions, you know, declining conditions. So, yeah.
Yeah. So it means, in a sense, we have to oppose both wings of the ruling class, those who are for cutting immigration and those who are for increasing numbers and massive amounts, you know, which is particularly that second bit the left doesn't do. And what does it mean concretely is rather than having moralist appeal that just say, yeah, refugees are welcome here and celebrate immigration or else you're racist, rather is to try to, and that I'm not saying that's easy, but it's really to try to push forward a struggle which can both advance the interests of native-born worker and foreign-born workers. And it's to try to show in the struggle against the ruling class, against the government, why those two interests collide. And obviously that requires defending immigrants, defending Muslim people, including against, you know, racist thugs and riots. But it also, you have to engage with that section of the working class, which looks in to the right by making obviously a working class case to it. But you won't be able to do this if you cling to liberal notions on immigration.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that's sort of a short, we could talk about this for another hour. Honestly, there's so much to say and probably that's a bit superficial. But point being that Zara Sultana, if we sort of take a step back, she says she draws a good line against the ruling class, but that are quite abstract and removed from working class conditions while clinging to certain liberal positions, which guarantee that it will push workers away. And in a sense, what I find, so that's our criticism, but what's good in a certain way with Zara Sultana's left turn is that it's not just a Sultana problem. Actually, the problem of Zara Sultana are the problems of basically the rest of the far left on those questions.
Yeah.
You know, the SWP has more or less the same politics. All the left is wrestling with these questions. How to unite Muslim, conservative people and trans people, how to unite workers and immigrants and undercut the right on those questions. And the left has really, you know, the reason why it's small and in crisis is particularly because it's been unable to solve those questions. And the right wing has really seized on these as like wedge issues in which they can really push their own reactionary agenda.
No, I think that's a good point, that this is a reflection of the problems of the left and why it's so weak. Yeah. So I guess for me, I want to bring it back to one of the questions we started with, which is we critically support Sultana. We want her politics to be the politics of the party. We want her to struggle to defeat Corbyn's politics, etc. Yet we've just been talking for the last 40 minutes about problems with Sultana. So, like, how would you explain this to a listener who's like, wait, what are these guys talking about? They're confused.
Yeah.
So, because, you know, we're anti-NATO, we're pro-Palestine, we're anti-Zion, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, so how would we, say you were able to advise Sultana, what would you tell her to do?
Gosh. I would say take the fight to Corbyn, and then we really need to cohere a faction or a grouping, a caucus, whatever you want to call it, that can really develop a clear socialist program. And when I talk about a socialist program, I'm not talking about shouting slogans about, you know, just being more radical than the person to your right. A program that can connect both anti-capitalist struggle against the British ruling class with offering serious answers to the polarizations that are currently tearing apart the working class. And really being able to intersect those and resolve them in a progressive way forward. So sort of two things: fight Corbyn and deepen urgently your political program. And I think it's breaking with liberalism. You know, you really have to ditch sort of liberal politics in order to be able to do really this task. So that's what we've been fighting for in your party. And so far it sometimes feel a little bit like screaming in a desert, but we've put forward a program when we wrote Let's Build a Revolutionary Caucus in Your Party, and we were like, the left needs to get together, different groups, different people. We need to work out an actual program on which we can work together and that can actually develop serious answers to those questions. because the party will encounter this. You're going to go knock on doors, and people are going to tell you exactly, well, isn't it the immigrants, or isn't it? They're going to tell you those. So what are we going to say?
Exactly. Yeah.
If we just say the same liberal platitudes, your party's not going to work. You need to actually develop working class answer, which no one on the left, honestly, I don't want to brag too much, but very few people on the left have actually given serious thoughts to, what's a Marxist working class answer on immigration, on the trans question? How can you unite those two groups and all those difficult social questions? So that's why we fight for a revolutionary caucus in your party. That would be what we would want to create, which can, I don't know, hopefully we can win over Zara Sultana, or at least point out her shortcoming and create a new pole in that party.
For sure. My other question, I guess maybe very briefly, can we go into a little bit of, look, the result of this conference was what we call a moral victory for the left. Sultana came out looking quite good, and the left came out feeling empowered. And I think that includes a substantial part of the base as well. And it's been 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks since the conference. I think people have kind of taken away their lessons, or they're in the process of figuring out what to do next. I'm talking here about the socialist left. But I think, of course, the left being what it is, they all have their differences in terms of what's next. Maybe can we just, do you have a bit of how would you summarize maybe where the British left is at?
No.
Are there different trends that you see consolidating, or are they kind of all over the place, or are they onwards and upwards?
No, there are trends. The easiest one is the Revolutionary Communist Group, which we've worked with. At some point, we had certain blocks and certain assembly with them because they're pushing similar politics, but they're really on the sectarian trend. They're sort of this. Their latest article after the conference was "Your party a stinking corpse." So sort of saying, Sultana didn't wage a fight against Corbyn, so the whole thing is dead, and sort of, I think, preparing their exit. Or I guess we'll see. They haven't said so explicitly, but basically that's the feel I get. And they're joined with the RCP, for example, the Revolutionary Communist Party, which also never really, didn't even bother to intervene at Your Party conference. I think they were the only group on the far left which wasn't there at all at the conference. They really ignored this, saying, oh, there's a bunch of division, there's not that much members, so let's just ignore that. So that's sort of the trend, and I think it will continue to exist, and I think, they're wrong. Yes, Your Party has a ton of problem, but it is, as we said, this is an opportunity to create something, but also to have all the far left come together in the same room, which was actually kind of a good thing at the conference. Is all the far left group now have to stop ignoring each other and actually talk to each other and figure out those tough questions to get stuck in and push that debate forward. The other trend, I think, that it's still early on, we'll have to see, but there's elections coming up early next year.
The council elections.
No, the elections to the leadership of your party.
The Central Executive Committee of your party. Yes,
there are council election in May, but first, before in February, they'll elect a leadership, actually. Because, the conference didn't elect a leadership, which is weird, I know, but the executive committee will be elected in February. And I think there is we've touched a bit the left that just wants Sultana and Corbyn to unite. And I think this will be a trend that we will see that will be growing as well. So I think groups like Counterfire, if I'm not mistaken, are trying to push really for just a unity slate of Corbyn and Sultana, or else are thinking even of a slate which is neither Corbyn nor Sultana. Sort of let the members take control. And this is really mistaken, because it's another way to avoid, we talked about it, to put that fight to the fore and saying, here are two sides, and to take a clear side with Sultana against the right wing in different ways. And so I think we'll see this on the left. I think a lot of leftists don't really know how to deal with Sultana's left-wing speech, and they're sort of worried of capitulating to her if they support her. So a lot of them adopt either a agnostic position between both, or else just unite and get it together without actually taking a clear side. And I think that's quite bad, honestly.
Okay.
For me, these are the two trends I see on the left, and there are the democratic socialists who I think will we've had a bit of interactions with them, but they're really focused on party democracy. And I think they're struggling to try to find a sort of structure point on which they can campaign in a sense. These guys they're democratic socialists. We agree with them on some points and had interesting discussion, but they're really fixated on the structure of your party. Has to be democratic in the structure at the expense, I think, of clear politics sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's another trend.
I kind of almost consciously didn't go into this whole discussion just because, one, I feel like it's subsided to some extent now. I mean, since the conference, I'm not sure, I could be wrong on this, but it's just like when you have a party which doesn't have a clue of what its politics are, then to make the whole fight about the structure and, democracy is to really remove the whole question of democracy from politics, if that makes sense. But I got sick of this discussion. Yeah. Again, our listeners can go watch one of your videos where you take this up.
Yeah, politics first. But you saw also how the conference kind of proved our point. Like, the conference was super anti-democratic. It was a total stitch up. There's no doubt about this on the left of the party. However, the left still sort of came out relatively, cautiously victorious out of it.
Exactly.
Of course, we're against the bureaucratic stitch up in the rules and we would want that to change. But what matters is actually the clash of living forces. And the fact that the left wing, the Zahra Sultana speech appeal to broad layers of the party. That's why they can't really just kick out the left. It's not so much the rules again. It's like, what's your weight? And so the left has to cohere itself around a political program in order to control the party, in order to dominate the party. It's not just the.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So, I guess to bring this to a close, has a future, but it depends, I guess, would be the summary.
Yeah. It depends which of Corbyn and Sultana wing dominates, and then it depends, particularly on the left wing, if it's able to really give itself a political coherence for the era we live in. That is, if it can reject liberalism, if it can really reject just sloganeering and really connect with the working class. Yeah. And that's not a given.
And I think people realize that the stakes are really high. A reform government is going to be bad news across the board, including for the economy. Like Farage is very good at talking, but he has no clue. He has no answers for Britain's economy, which none of the mainstream parties do, because Britain's problems are very much caught up with the whole crisis of British imperialism, and it's not going to take a different policy to resuscitate the economy. But the stakes are very high. So I think for dedicated members in your party, which there are many, 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 for the left, this is really an urgent call to really thrash out some working class answers to the key questions that already confront the working class, but, that are going to be posed, I think, ever more sharply in the coming months and years. So,
and so far, this question of the stakes are high is mainly used by the right wing or by the center element of stop fighting, the stakes are high, we need the party now. And the left really has a responsibility here to intervene and say, look, yes, the stakes are high, but the way we can defeat reform is if we can win over part of its working class base, really. And we're not going to do this without clear politics, without clear answers. And I think that has to be done on the left. It isn't being done at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, I think that's as good as note as any to end our conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to explain all the things. I appreciate it.
Well, always a pleasure. And check out our YouTube page if you want to.
Yeah.
If you can't get enough of your party, we have more videos there.
Great. Yeah, no, I will link that stuff in the show notes. Please do follow us on X and Instagram at Workers Hammer as well. Check out our paper, Workers Hammer. We compiled, actually, I'm going to shout out to Comrade Kat. She did the hard work of compiling a really nice leaflet of all of our articles and leaflets on your party. And it's called How to Make Your Party Work, I think. Yeah. Anyways, we give out tons of those in Liverpool, and we still got plenty. But anyways, you can go check it out on the website at iclfi.org. Yes. And thank you very much, Mansa, for your time. I'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye, Mansa.
Bye.